The bridge of the United Earth Alliance vessel Relentless hummed with activity as Commander Lisa Moore reviewed the mission details one final time. The ship's sleek design and powerful engines represented the best of human engineering, a fact that had not gone unnoticed by the various alien species they had encountered since humanity's expansion into the stars. "We're 30 minutes from Centauri space, Commander," said Lieutenant Paul Evans from the navigation station. His fingers danced across the holographic controls, making small adjustments to their approach vector. Lisa nodded, her expression serious. "Alert the diplomatic team. I want everyone ready and presentable when we dock." This mission was too important for mistakes. The Centauri Federation had only recently been discovered, and this would be the first formal treaty between their civilizations. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community, and every successful diplomatic engagement helped secure their position. In his quarters, Alan Wright adjusted his formal uniform, checking that each medal and commendation sat perfectly aligned on his chest. As the Alliance's top negotiator, he had closed deals with 12 different alien species, but something about this mission made him uneasy. "Computer, display Centauri cultural briefing again," he said, watching as information filled the air before him. The Centauri were humanoid with blue-tinted skin and four-fingered hands. They valued formality and precision in all dealings. Their society was highly structured, with clear hierarchies that had remained stable for centuries. What the briefing didn't explain was why a faction called the Stellar Liberation Front had suddenly gained prominence in their politics. Hours later, the diplomatic team sat in the grand hall of the Centauri Central Government Complex. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings twice as high as those on Earth, casting rainbow patterns across the gathered delegates. The Centauri High Minister Vasol raised a ceremonial cup. "To peaceful cooperation between our peoples," he said in carefully practiced English. Alan smiled and raised his own cup. "To new friendships among the stars," he replied in basic Centauri, earning appreciative murmurs from the aliens. The explosion that followed threw Alan against the far wall. Through ringing ears, he heard screams and shouts. Smoke filled the room as figures in dark armor stormed through broken doors. Blue energy weapons flashed, and several Centauri security officers fell. "Nobody move," shouted one of the attackers in accented English. "The Stellar Liberation Front now controls this facility." Hélène watched in horror as Commander Moore reached for her concealed sidearm, only to be struck down by a stun blast. 3 other human diplomats were quickly rounded up alongside him. "The human delegates will come with us," the leader announced, pulling off his helmet to reveal the angular features of a Centauri male, his face marked with ceremonial scars not mentioned in any briefing. "I am Kravax, and your people will pay handsomely for your safe return." Across the galaxy, on the human colony world of New Washington, Admiral Peter Johnson was awakened by an urgent communication. The Admiral's quarters shifted from darkness to dim light as he sat up in bed. "Johnson here," he said, instantly alert despite the late hour. The screen showed the grim face of his communications officer. "Sir, we've received a transmission from the Centauri system. The diplomatic mission has been attacked. Several of our people have been taken hostage." Johnson's expression hardened. "Connect me to the Secretary of Defense. Activate Protocol 7 Delta." "Sir, the hostage-takers have demands. They want Earth to give up claims on." "It doesn't matter what they want," Johnson interrupted. "Protocol 7 Delta. Now." As news spread throughout nearby systems, representatives from a dozen alien species expressed shock at humanity's response. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to discuss the situation. "They won't even hear the demands?" asked the Vexillian ambassador, antennae twitching in confusion. "Humans are saying they do not negotiate with rebels or terrorists under any circumstances," replied the Tholian representative. "It is their policy. But their own people will die. They say that giving in would only encourage more kidnappings." The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as members contemplated this strange approach. None of them understood that humanity's stance came from centuries of hard-learned lessons, paid for in blood. In the darkness of space, 3 stealth destroyers quietly changed course toward the Centauri system. Kravax stood before the communication screen, his blue skin appearing almost purple under the harsh lights of the rebel base. Behind him, 4 human diplomats sat with their hands bound, including Alan Wright, whose face remained calm despite a cut above his left eye. "People of Earth," Kravax began, his voice carrying the musical accent of all Centauri. "We hold your representatives as our guests. They will remain unharmed if you meet our simple demands." He gestured to a star map that appeared beside him. "These 3 border systems rightfully belong to the Centauri people. Your mining operations must end within 10 standard days. Additionally, we require payment of 50 million credits to compensate for resources already stolen." Elen watched the rebel leader with careful eyes. In the 12 hours since their capture, he had observed much about these rebels. They seemed confident, perhaps too confident. They clearly expected humans to behave like the other species they had encountered. In a secure conference room on Earth, Secretary of Defense Samantha Collins replayed the message for the 3rd time. Her short gray hair framed a face that had seen 4 decades of military service before entering politics. "Are we certain of the location?" she asked, looking at the intelligence officers gathered around the table. "Yes, Madam Secretary," replied Colonel Joe Barnes. "We've identified the base on the 3rd moon of Centauri Prime. Our stealth vessels are already in position." Samantha nodded. "Then we proceed with the Terran ultimatum." She moved to the communication station and straightened her uniform. The technicians signaled that the channel was open and broadcasting across all major frequencies, ensuring that not just the rebels but the entire galactic community would hear. "This message is for the organization calling itself the Stellar Liberation Front. I am Secretary of Defense Samantha Collins of the United Earth Alliance. We have received your communication and have a single response." She paused, her voice becoming colder. "You have exactly 24 hours to release all hostages unconditionally. If you fail to do so, we will enact total resolution of this situation by any means necessary. There will be no further warnings." The transmission ended, leaving stunned silence in its wake across a dozen worlds. In the rebel base, Dr. Kevin Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his restraints. As an exobiologist who had studied Centauri culture, he understood their psychology better than most humans. "They don't understand what they've done," he whispered to Alan. "What do you mean?" Alan asked, keeping his voice low. "Centauri culture has no concept like our no negotiation with terrorists policy. In their history, hostage exchanges always involved bargaining. They expect us to counteroffer. They have no idea what's coming." Alan nodded slowly. "Should we warn them?" Kevin considered this. "They wouldn't believe us anyway. Humans have a reputation for being soft compared to older species. They think our talk of rights and diplomacy makes us weak." Across the room, Kravax laughed as he discussed the human response with his lieutenants. "See how quickly they responded. They are afraid. Now we simply wait for their real offer." His second-in-command, Vassar, looked less certain. What if they meant exactly what they said? Kravax dismissed this with a wave of his 4-fingered hand. "Impossible. No species sacrifices their own people so easily. The humans value individuals too highly. By tomorrow, they will offer at least half of what we demanded." On the Galactic Council station orbiting the neutral world of Harmony, representatives from 23 species debated the unfolding crisis. The Jolar delegate, an ancient species known for meditation, stood before the assembly. "We must intervene." The tall, willowy alien insisted. "Human military doctrine is well documented. They will sacrifice their own people rather than establish a precedent of giving in to demands." The Telex representative fluttered wing membranes in agitation. "Surely they are bluffing. No civilized species would." "You misunderstand humans," interrupted Jolar. "They see a pattern across centuries. When they negotiate with hostage-takers, more hostages are taken in the future. Their coldness now is meant to prevent greater suffering later. In orbit around Earth, The heavy cruiser Judgment received new orders. Captain William Green read them once, then again, his face showing no emotion. "Prepare special operations teams," he told his first officer. "We deploy in 6 hours." Captain William Green stood in the briefing room of the UEA Special Operations vessel, Shadowfall. The ship's stealth systems kept it hidden just outside Centauri sensor range. Around him, 20 elite soldiers listened carefully to his every word. "This is not a negotiation mission," he said, pointing to the holographic display of the rebel base. "Our orders are simple: extract our people and eliminate any resistance." Lieutenant Olivia Martinez studied the base layout. Her dark hair was cut short in military style, and a small scar ran along her jawline from a previous mission. "Sir, what about the Centauri government? Are they helping us?" "No," Green replied. "They've been informed that we're handling this ourselves. Any interference will be considered hostile action." Sergeant Frank Miller checked his weapon, a compact pulse rifle designed for close-quarter combat. "Rules of engagement, sir. Anyone who surrenders is to be detained. Anyone who fights." Green didn't need to finish the sentence. His team understood perfectly. Back on Earth, Admiral Johnson stood before the Alliance Council, a group of 30 elected officials who oversaw human space policy. The chamber was filled with concerned faces. "Admiral, explain to us why we aren't negotiating," demanded Counselor Susan Parker. "These are our people's lives at stake." Johnson activated a display showing statistics from Earth's history. In the 21st century, nations that paid ransom saw an 85% increase in kidnappings the following year. Those that refused to negotiate saw incidents drop by 30% within 2 years. He moved to another screen. In 2157, when the Mars colony paid terrorists to release hostages, we had 7 more incidents within 6 months. After we adopted the non-negotiation policy in 2160, hostage-taking dropped to near zero within our territory. The room fell silent as the numbers made their point. "We're not being cruel," Johnson continued. "We're preventing future kidnappings. If rebels learn that taking humans gets them nothing but military response, they stop taking humans." Across the galaxy, thousands of news feeds carried stories about the human response. On the Galactic News Network, alien experts debated human psychology. "They're simply barbaric," insisted Professor Zoltar, a Rigelian sociologist. "No advanced species would risk their diplomats this way." "You misunderstand," countered Dr. Ilara, one of the few non-humans who had studied on Earth. "Humans think long-term about group survival. They believe that showing weakness now will cause more death later." In countless homes across a dozen worlds, citizens watched with growing concern as humanity's deadline approached. Many had never seen such an uncompromising stance. On the rebel moon base, Dr. Martinez tried again to warn their captors. The guards had grown more nervous as time passed without a counteroffer from Earth. "In human history," he explained to a young rebel who brought food, "we learned that paying ransoms only creates more kidnappings. Our government won't negotiate because they believe it saves more lives in the long run." The young Centauri's skin paled slightly. "But they must care about your safety." "They do," Martinez said. "But they care more about making sure this never happens again. They've probably already sent soldiers to rescue us." The rebel laughed nervously. "Impossible. No one could find this base, and even if they did, our defenses would detect any approach." Alan Wright, overhearing the conversation, simply smiled. He had worked with military personnel enough to know what was likely happening right now. In space, 3 kilometers from the rebel base, 12 humans in advanced stealth suits floated silently. Their armor masked all life signs and heat signatures as they approached the moon's surface. Lieutenant Martinez checked her team's position one final time before giving the hand signal to proceed. On the Galactic Council station, Ambassador John Baker faced hostile questions from a dozen species. "How can you claim to value life while risking your own people this way?" demanded the Protean representative. Baker's response was measured. Sometimes, to save many lives tomorrow, you must be willing to risk a few today. Our history taught us this lesson through blood and tears. We won't forget it, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you. The countdown on Admiral Johnson's desk showed 8 hours remaining before the deadline expired. He knew that by now, Operation Silent Retrieval would be well underway. He picked up a small photo of his own daughter in military uniform and whispered, "Bring them home, Captain Green." Lieutenant Olivia Martinez moved silently through the maintenance shaft. The rebel base had been built into the side of a crater, with thick walls designed to withstand bombardment from above. But the Centauri had never fought humans before, and they hadn't considered all attack vectors. "Point A secured," she whispered into her comm unit. Her helmet display showed the positions of her 3 squad members behind her and the other teams moving through different parts of the base. Captain Green's voice came through clearly. "Proceed to extraction point. Beta team has eyes on the hostages." Deeper in the base, Sergeant Miller and his team disabled the security systems one by one. Unlike the flashy tech in movies, real stealth operations moved slowly and carefully. Each guard was quietly neutralized, each camera loop set up perfectly. No alarms had sounded. "These humans fight like ghosts," one young rebel guard whispered to another. "My cousin served on a border station. He said they appear from nowhere and vanish just as fast." "Stop scaring yourself," his partner replied. "No one can get through our defenses." The conversation ended as a small canister rolled between them, releasing a quick-acting sedative gas. 2 humans in black armor stepped over their unconscious bodies moments later. In the detention block, Dr. Martinez continued his psychological campaign. 3 days of carefully planted stories about human military operations had made several guards increasingly nervous. "You really should consider surrendering," Martinez told the senior guard. "When humans say total resolution, they don't mean negotiations." The guard's skin darkened in the Centauri equivalent of a scowl. "Be quiet. Your government has only 6 hours left before we start sending them pieces of you." Alan Wright, sitting nearby, spoke calmly. "That would be a serious mistake. If you harm any of us, there won't be a moon base left, just a crater." The guard raised his weapon. More empty threats. "Not threats, just facts. Humans don't bluff about these things." On the diplomatic front, Heather Thompson worked tirelessly in the Galactic Council headquarters. As a mid-level official from Earth's diplomatic corps, her job was to ensure the coming operation didn't violate any council protocols. "I need to file these exclusion papers," she explained to a confused alien clerk. "Exclusion from what?" the clerk asked, multiple eyes blinking. "From the Humanitarian Intervention Clause of the Galactic Charter. Earth is formally declaring this an internal security operation." The clerk's tentacles trembled slightly. "But that clause only needs to be bypassed if you're planning actions that would otherwise." "Exactly," Thompson said with a smile. "Now I need these processed immediately." Across the hall, representatives from 17 worlds watched in stunned silence as humans methodically filed paperwork for actions they hadn't yet taken. "They're following every legal procedure," the Andorian delegate whispered, while simultaneously preparing for violence. "How can they be so compartmentalized?" "It's why they're dangerous," replied the Draconian ambassador. "They can be perfectly civilized and utterly brutal within the same breath." Back in the rebel base, Kravax grew increasingly agitated as the deadline approached with no counteroffer from Earth. "Send another message," he ordered. "Tell them we'll reduce our demands to just 2 systems." His lieutenant, Vassur, looked worried. "Leader, perhaps we should consider releasing 1 hostage as a sign of good faith. The humans seem unusual in their approach." "Weakness," Kravax snapped. "All species negotiate when their people are at risk. They're simply taking time to gather funds." A young rebel burst into the room. "Sir, we've lost contact with the outer checkpoints." Before Kravax could respond, the lights in the complex flickered. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red light. "What's happening?" he demanded. Vassar checked the security screens, most of which showed only static. I don't know. Communications are down. Internal sensors are malfunctioning. In the ventilation system above them, Lieutenant Martinez checked her tactical display one last time. All teams were in position. The hostages had been located and tagged. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Shadowfall, this is extraction, leader, she whispered. We are go for Phase 2. Captain Green's voice came back immediately. Acknowledge. You have clearance to proceed. Bring our people home. In the holding cell, Alan Wright heard a faint sound from above. He caught Dr. Martinez's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Both men slowly shifted position, moving away from the walls and doors. The guard noticed their movement. What are you doing? Stay where you are. You might want to surrender now, Alan suggested calmly. It would be the smart choice. Secretary Collins sat at her desk, watching the countdown timer. 1 hour remained before the deadline expired. Before her lay a simple black device with a single red button. She placed her palm on the scanner beside it and waited for confirmation. Biometrics accepted, announced the computer. Secretary of Defense Samantha Collins. Authorization confirmed for Operation Thunderclap. She pressed the button. Thousands of kilometers above Earth, a satellite received the signal. The message traveled through subspace relays, crossing vast distances in seconds. In orbit around the Centauri moon, the UEA destroyer Vigilant received the authorization code. Captain Laura Reed acknowledged the order. Prepare kinetic strike. Target the abandoned mining outpost at these coordinates. On the bridge, officers moved with practiced efficiency. No one questioned the order. They had all been briefed on the plan. Launching in 3, 2, 1. The ship shuddered slightly as a tungsten rod, 3 meters long and half a meter wide, was fired from the ship's main railgun. No explosives were needed. At its speed, the rod's kinetic energy alone would cause devastation. On the moon's surface, the Revel mining outpost stood empty. Once used to process rare minerals, it had been abandoned months ago when the operation moved to a new location. Now it served a different purpose. The rod struck with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The ground shook. A blinding flash lit up the lunar sky, visible even from the main rebel base 40 kilometers away. A massive crater formed where the outpost had stood. In the rebel command center, Kovacs watched through surveillance cameras as the dust cloud rose into the thin atmosphere. His face had lost its blue tint, turning almost gray with shock. They actually fired on us, he whispered. Vassar's voice shook as he spoke. That was a warning, leader. The mining site had no people. They could have hit us here instead. Kovacs stared at the screen, his confidence crumbling. Send a message. Tell them we will discuss their terms. It's too late for that, Vassar said, pointing to another screen where alarms flashed across the security system. We've got multiple breaches. I think they're already inside. Panic spread through the rebel ranks as the reality of their situation became clear. Junior members looked to their leaders for guidance, but found only confusion and fear. In the Galactic Council chamber, delegates watched the live feed from the Centauri system. The destruction of the mining outpost had been broadcast across all major networks. This is barbaric, shouted the Proxima representative, their voice translator struggling to convey their outrage. Ambassador John Baker stood calmly amidst the chaos. The target was uninhabited. We confirmed this through multiple sources before the strike. This was not an attack, but a demonstration of intent. A demonstration, asked the Regellian delegate. What exactly are you demonstrating? That humans mean exactly what they say, Baker replied. When we set a deadline, it is absolute. The older species in the room fell silent. Some of them recognized this approach from their own ancient histories before they had joined the galactic community. The Jola representative, one of the oldest species present, spoke quietly. Many cycles ago, before we found peace, My people faced similar choices. Sometimes, a controlled display of force prevents greater bloodshed later. On the rebel moon, Lieutenant Martinez's team moved through the corridors with practiced precision. 2 more holding cells had been cleared, but the main hostages were still unaccounted for. Beta Team reports Central Command is barricaded, came Sergeant Miller's voice over the comm. They've got at least 15 fighters in there. And our people? Martins asked. Thermal scans show 4 human signatures inside. Captain Green's voice cut in. All teams be advised. Our demonstration strike has been completed. Expect increased resistance from those who realize they've miscalculated. Remember, primary objective is hostage extraction. Secondary objective is securing the leadership. In the central command room, Alan Wright helped Dr. Martins, and the other diplomats moved behind heavy equipment as Kravax and his inner circle argued about what to do next. They'll kill us all, shouted one rebel. We should surrender while we can, urged Vosser. Kravax pulled out his weapon. No one is surrendering. The humans won't risk hitting this room while their people are here. Alan caught Dr. Martinez's eye and whispered, That's exactly what they don't understand about us. Outside the door, Lieutenant Martinez placed breaching charges as her team prepared to enter. 30 seconds, she told them. On my mark. The breaching charges exploded with a blinding flash. Before the smoke cleared, Lieutenant Martinez and her team rushed through the opening. Their weapons moved in practiced patterns, covering every corner of the room. Down. Everyone down, she shouted. Several rebels dropped to the floor immediately, hands raised. Others hesitated, caught between surrender and resistance. In the critical first seconds, those who chose wrong paid the price. Human weapons fired with precise bursts. 3 rebels who reached for weapons fell without getting off a single shot. Kravax stared in shock at the black-armored humans who had appeared so suddenly in his command center. How did you get past our sensors? No one answered him. The Special Forces team moved with mechanical efficiency, securing the room in seconds. Friendlies identified, called one soldier, moving toward the diplomats. We have all 4 hostages, alive and unharmed. Lieutenant Martinez approached Alan Wright. Sir, can you walk? Alan nodded. We're all mobile. You have excellent timing, Lieutenant. Let's move, she said, helping the diplomats to their feet. Extraction route is secured, but we need to be quick. Across the room, Sergeant Miller secured Kravax, binding the rebel leader's hands. Target 1 is secured, he reported. On the Shadowfall, Captain Green received the update with silent satisfaction. Extraction team, you have 10 minutes to reach the pickup point. The second phase of operations begins in 15 minutes. In the corridors of the rebel base, alarms blared as the remaining fighters realized what was happening. Some rushed to block the humans' escape route. They were met by Sergeant Miller's diversionary team, who had set up perfect firing positions at key junctions. I don't understand, gasped a wounded rebel as Miller's team stepped over him. How did you plan this so perfectly? Miller paused briefly. We've been running simulations of this operation since the moment you took our people. Every possible scenario, every possible response. The rebel shook his head in disbelief. But that's impossible. You had less than 3 days. 3 days is a lot of time for humans when our people are in danger, Miller replied before moving on. Lieutenant Martinez led the diplomats through a maintenance tunnel that had been cleared earlier. Behind them, the sounds of fighting echoed through the base as more rebels encountered the human forces. Almost there, she told the hostages as they approached an airlock. Beyond it, a small transport waited to take them to the Shadowfall. Alan looked at her. What about the rest of the rebels? Not our concern, Martinez said. Once you're safe, the fleet has other plans for this facility. Dr. Martinez understood immediately. The secondary strikes. They're going to hit other rebel bases too, aren't they? Lieutenant Martinez nodded. Secretary Collins was very clear. This needs to send a message that will be remembered for generations. In Earth orbit, Secretary Collins received word of the successful extraction. Without hesitation, she opened a secure channel to Admiral Johnson. The hostages are secure. Proceed with Phase 3. Admiral Johnson turned to his communications officer. Send the order. All designated targets are now authorized. Across 3 star systems, human ships that had been quietly positioning themselves received their orders. Their targets were rebel supply depots, training facilities, and communication centers identified over the previous months by human intelligence. On the Galactic Council station, Ambassador Baker received news of the hostage rescue. He interrupted the ongoing debate about human tactics with a calm announcement. I am pleased to inform the Council that all human diplomats have been safely recovered. He paused as murmurs spread through the chamber. However, I must also inform you that additional operations against rebel facilities are now underway. But you have your people back, protested the Proxima representative. Why continue fighting? Because the message isn't complete, Baker explained. If we stop now, others might think they could try similar actions and simply surrender when things go badly. That is not acceptable. In the Centauri government complex, officials watched with growing concern as reports came in of strikes against rebel facilities throughout their territory. The humans had not asked permission, nor did they seem to care about Centauri's sovereignty. The High Minister turned to his advisors. Did anyone know they had mapped all these rebel locations? No one answered. The humans had known more about the rebels than the Centauri government itself. On the Shadowfall, Alan Wright and the other diplomats received medical attention as the ship moved away from the moon. Through a viewport, Alan saw flashes of light on the surface as the secondary strikes began. Is this really necessary? He asked Captain Green. Yes, Green replied without hesitation. Because we never want to have this conversation again. 2 weeks after the hostage rescue, the Centauri government held a formal ceremony to apologize to Earth. The Great Hall had been rebuilt, with extra security measures visible everywhere. High Minister Vassal bowed deeply to the human representatives. The Centauri Federation offers its deepest regrets for the actions of the rebels, he said. We have begun removing all sympathizers from our government and military. Secretary Collins nodded politely. The human response had shocked the galaxy, but it had achieved exactly what Earth wanted. In the days following the operation, 17 smaller rebel groups across 3 systems had voluntarily surrendered rather than face human forces. The United Earth Alliance accepts your apology, Collins replied formally. We look forward to resuming normal diplomatic relations. Everyone in the room understood the unspoken message. Next time, respond faster or face the consequences. On the Galactic Council station, Admiral Johnson and Ambassador Baker faced hostile questions from a dozen alien representatives. The emergency session had been called to discuss humanity's excessive response to the hostage situation. You struck 37 rebel facilities across Centauri space, said the Procyon delegate. Many of these attacks occurred after your people were already safe. How do you justify such aggression? Admiral Johnson stepped forward. He wore his full dress uniform, medals gleaming under the lights. I will not apologize for protecting human lives, both present and future. He activated a display showing statistics. Since our operation, attempted kidnappings of human citizens have dropped by 92% across all sectors. No other species can claim such results. Ambassador Baker added, we have prepared a full report on our decision-making process. The data is clear. Species who negotiate with hostage takers face an average of 843% increase in similar incidents within a standard galactic year. The council chamber fell silent as delegates reviewed the information. The numbers were difficult to argue with, even if the methods seemed harsh. To everyone's surprise, the representative from Trillia, a relatively young spacefaring species, stood up. My government requests human advisors to help formulate our own crisis response policies. Within days, 6 other species had made similar requests. The older civilizations watched with concern as humanity's influence grew. Dr. Kevin Martinez returned to Earth as a hero. His understanding of Centauri psychology had helped the hostages survive until rescue came. Now, universities across human space wanted him to speak about his experience. At the Central University of New Washington, he addressed a packed auditorium. What many species don't understand is that our approach isn't about violence. It's about clarity. When humans say, "We don't negotiate with terrorists," we mean exactly that. A student raised her hand. But some aliens call us barbaric for this policy. Are they right? They have a different perspective. Martinez explained. Many older species have forgotten what it's like to face existential threats. They've had peace for so long that they can't imagine why we're so uncompromising. He displayed a chart showing kidnapping statistics before and after the Centauri incident. But they're starting to learn that our way works. Across human space, military recruiters noted a surge in applications. Young men and women watched news reports about the rescue operation and wanted to be part of something that protected their people so effectively. On the Centauri homeworld, the trial of Kravax and his lieutenants began. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy. Vassar had turned witness against his former leader, describing in detail how they had completely misunderstood human psychology. "We thought they would be weak like the others," he testified. "We thought they valued individual lives too much to risk them. We were wrong." Kravax sat in silence, his once proud posture now broken. He had become a warning to others who might consider similar actions against humans. In her office on Earth, Secretary Collins reviewed requests from 17 species seeking information about human security protocols. She signed approvals for information sharing with a slight smile. "They thought we were the barbarians," she told her assistant. "Now they want to learn from us." Admiral Johnson looked out his office window at the stars. "They're starting to understand. We're not cruel, we're just clear. When we say something, we mean it." The galaxy was learning a new phrase that would enter diplomatic language for centuries. Human terms, meaning conditions that were absolute and non-negotiable. 6 months after the Centauri incident, a group of pirates from the Orion cluster seized several merchant vessels near a major trade route. The ships carried passengers and crew from 12 different species, including a small human transport with 20 crew members. The pirate leader, Captain Drav of the vessel, Night Shadow, sent ransom demands to each of the home governments. He expected the usual responses: negotiations, offers, and eventually payment. Most species had always handled these situations the same way. What he didn't expect was the unified response that came instead. Admiral Johnson sat in the emergency session of the Galactic Council, watching with quiet satisfaction as representatives from species that had once criticized human methods now stood together. "The Trillia Republic refuses to negotiate with these criminals," announced their ambassador firmly. "The Proxima Confederation stands with our human allies in their policy of non-negotiation," declared another. One by one, each affected government made the same declaration. Even species that had been paying ransoms for centuries now took a different approach. Captain Drav received their unified message with growing disbelief. "They can't all be serious," he told his first mate. "Someone will break ranks. Someone always does." But no counter-offers came. Instead, military vessels from 12 worlds formed a joint task force. They moved into position around the pirates' known territory within days. On the bridge of the UEA cruiser Determination, Captain Lisa Moore watched as ships from formerly rival species coordinated their efforts with remarkable efficiency. "I never thought I'd see this," said her first officer. "The Proxima and Andorian vessels are actually sharing tactical data." Lisa nodded. "Amazing what a common purpose can achieve. Prepare the assault teams. We move in 6 hours." The joint operation that followed became a case study in military academies across the galaxy. Ships that had never worked together before executed a flawless coordinated strike. The pirates, expecting negotiations to continue for weeks, were caught completely unprepared. All hostages were rescued safely. Captain Drav, captured alive, could only stare in shock as he was brought before representatives of 12 species. Why? He asked the Trillia commander, "Your people have always paid before." "We learned from our human friends," was the simple reply. Sometimes the best way to protect your people is to make it clear that taking them gains you nothing. On Earth, Dr. Kevin Martinez completed his new book, The Psychology of Deterrence: How Human Policy Changed Galactic Security. It became required reading in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. In the Galactic Council's Grand Chamber, a historic vote took place. The Council formally adopted a modified version of humanity's approach, now called the Unified Response Protocol. The new policy established clear consequences for hostage-taking and terrorism across all member worlds. "This represents a fundamental shift in how we handle these threats," explained Ambassador Baker to reporters afterward. "For too long, many species believed that negotiation was the compassionate choice. Now they understand that true compassion means preventing future incidents." Not everyone embraced the change. Some older species argued that the galaxy was becoming more militaristic under human influence, but the numbers were hard to argue with. Incidents of piracy and hostage-taking dropped by 70% in the first year after the new policy was implemented. In a private meeting room on the council station, the ancient Jola representative met with Ambassador Baker. The tall, willowy alien species had witnessed thousands of years of galactic history. "You have taught us something important," Shoulder said softly. "My people had forgotten a lesson we once knew in our own violent past, that sometimes compassion for the many requires seeming harshness in the moment." Baker nodded. "Humans had to learn that lesson many times before it stuck. We're just glad the galaxy didn't have to pay the same price we did." 2 years after the Centauri incident, humanity was formally invited to join the Council's Security Committee, a position usually reserved for species with at least a century of galactic citizenship. The vote was nearly unanimous. Throughout civilized space, a new understanding had taken hold. When facing threats, unity and clarity were more effective than compromise and concession. The phrase "human terms" became a powerful concept in diplomatic language, conditions that would be enforced without exception. The final message echoed across the galaxy. When it comes to protecting their people and principles, humans don't negotiate with rebels. And now, neither does anyone else.